Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show, and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Kellie de Leon. She is the Vice President of Marketing and Strategy at the MX Group. Kellie, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and I'm excited about our topic today. We're going to be talking all about buyer-centric marketing. But before we begin, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background and what it is that you guys do at the MX Group?
Absolutely. So I've been in marketing for a little over 15 years now. I started out really focused on direct response, working for a $100 million and then $1 billion international nonprofit. So I started out really focused on things like direct mail and direct response TV and radio and telemarketing. And then I found my way to the agency side and have been working at a variety of different agencies for a little bit over 10 years now, primarily on the client services side. So I've worked across a pretty wide variety of industries. And so now I've been at the MX Group for about 6 years. And as you said, I'm the VP of Marketing and Strategy there. The MX Group is an integrated B2B agency with digital at our core. We're an independent agency. We've been around for about 30 years and solely focused on B2B. So we bring a full suite of services that really kind of focus on the idea that the most powerful results that we can deliver for clients come from connecting strategy to creative, to demand generation and digital development. So we really kind of think about how to put the B2B buyer experience at the core of everything we do and ensure that everything from strategy to message to tactics are connected, whether that's from doing persona research or applying that to a content marketing strategy, lead management processes, interactive content, custom software, websites, you name it, kind of the full gamut, but we're all organized around the idea of elevating that B2B customer experience to make sure to deliver results for our clients.
Love that you guys focus on the customer experience. It certainly speaks to what we're talking about today with the buyer-centric marketing. And, that's a kind of a buzzword that we hear a lot today. But to you, why does buyer-centric marketing matter?
Yeah, for sure. So it is kind of a buzzword, but for me, it's nothing new. I feel like marketers have been tasked with answering that what's in it for me question forever. And, as I mentioned, I kind of come from a nonprofit background. So maybe this lens was just ingrained for me from the beginning, because when you're asking donors to part with their money and essentially they get nothing in return, you have to really be intentional about understanding their motivations and their needs and how they prefer to interact. So that approach naturally translates to B2B because at the end of the day, right, we're all humans. Purchasing and even B2B decisions can be, highly emotional and we're still made by people. So I think that it's highly applicable. And at the MX Group, we've always kind of taken this customer as hero approach to how we think about things. So it's nothing new, but I guess when I would say, even though maybe it feels like a buzzword now, I think the reason that is because there are some changes that are happening in the way that people buy that make marketing being buyer-centric more important than it ever has before. So I think about things like the shift in buyers, if you think about things like the influx of B2C expectations, the rise of digital behaviors for research and buying behaviors, and even kind of the increasing role of millennial buyers. Some stats would say more than 50% of buyers that are doing initial research in the B2B space are millennials. So if you think about just all of the shift in that buying behavior, and then just the influx of what's on offer and kind of the democratization of B2B purchases, that there are more options available to buyers than ever before. They have more information at their fingertips that really have changed and shifted the way people buy, the way people select, and what it takes to be competitive from a standpoint of B2B sales. So when you put all of that together, to stand out, a B2B marketer has to make sure that they're delivering value, that the company delivers value not only in its product, but also in the buyer's journey on the way to getting to want to buy your product. So I feel like it's those shifts that make buyer-centric marketing more important than it ever has before.
That is fascinating, especially with thinking about the millennials being 50% of those who are doing the initial research. I'd never thought about that, but man, that is a fascinating fact. And so whenever we're talking about being buyer-centric, what does that mean to you and whenever you're consulting people at the MX Group?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing I'll say is I've settled around this term buyer-centric, but maybe even that's a misnomer. You hear these terms thrown around: customer-centric, buyer-centric, audience-centric. It all kind of needs to blend together to truly be successful. So I think about making sure that you're aligned across the entire customer journey, whether that's kind of the early stages where we think about buyers, from attracting them to engaging them, connecting all the way through to the initial purchase, as well as thinking through pushing all the way through the customer experience to things like launching, stabilizing that partnership, and then kind of an expansion of that relationship over time. So to be buyer-centric, it's really important to make sure that you're kind of addressing the customer questions and needs at all of the stages of that full life cycle. The other thing that I would say is, to be buyer-centric, you really have to obviously think about what it means to speak to buyers on their terms. So I think it's important to think about personalized, making sure that the information that you're delivering is on their terms, it's value-oriented around their needs and not your agenda. So as much as in the end, you want to make sure, obviously, that you're delivering marketing that's, moving people through the funnel and progressing towards a sale, the more you meet people where they're at and personalize to what they're needing, the more you're going to be successful. And I think the other thing that I would say is it's about being orchestrated and not controlled. I think as marketers, we want to think about this journey as step one, this will happen, and then they'll do this. And step two, I'm going to send this, which will make them do this other thing. And that's just not how people are. Life is messy. Buying groups are messy. People's decision-making processes are messy, and particularly in B2B, when that can take 6 months or a year or 18 months, depending on what your sales cycle is. It's just not that controlled. But we as marketers don't have to say it's completely chaotic and we have no control either. I think that we can think about how to orchestrate the right experiences for people in a way that makes sure that things are connected and coordinated and seamless, but still allowing the buyer to engage on their terms.
I love that. Yeah. So thinking of yourself more as a conductor rather than somebody who's controlling something is, I think, a really good mind shift. And, there's obviously lots of times that you probably look at clients and you say, or not necessarily clients, but let's just say that, none of your clients, but whenever you're looking at certain things out in the market and you see people are doing it wrong, what's some of those kind of common pitfalls that you see?
Yeah, it's easy to want to be buyer-centric, but it's a whole different thing to really do it right. And sometimes I think the way to know if you're doing it right is to make sure you're not doing it wrong. So these three things that I think about are kind of good benchmarks to be thinking about. And the first one is you don't know how you compare to the competition. So the fact of the matter is your buyer, your customer is evaluating other options, hearing messages from other competitors, whether they're a customer or a prospect, there are other messages happening in their ear. So if you don't know kind of what that broader conversation is and what your competition is and what you're up against, then you don't really know the right way to position yourself with buyers. So you have to make sure that you know how you compare to the competition. The second one is probably pretty obvious, but you're definitely doing it wrong if you're too focused on yourself. I think there was this sort of emergence of moving from product-based selling to solution-based selling a few years ago, but that was still about us, and we kind of tried to pretend that solution-based approach was about the buyer, but it was still really about us. And to be buyer-centric, you truly need to make sure that you're making the conversation about them, and we'll come back to you when it needs to be and when it's appropriate. And then the last one is just, you're doing it wrong if your messages don't fit your buyers. There are a lot of different pain points and needs that different buyers in the buyer group will have, and you need to make sure that you're kind of tailoring your approach to each of those groups, and trying to talk about the financial aspect with a user, or talking about downtime with a CFO who maybe is more just focused on the ROI of something. It's going to be a miss. So you got to make sure that you're kind of tailoring your message to the right person.
Today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing. Delphix, a big data platform, had hired an agency to manage their Google ads a few years ago, but they weren't seeing the results they wanted to see. Being such a technical B2B solution, they set out to find a team that could take on their challenge. After countless proposals, they found the perfect fit: Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. In just 1 week after launching Directive's campaigns, Delphix saw their lead volume double and their cost per lead drop by 60%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
We're talking a lot about being buyer-centric. How is it that you get to know a buyer in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great part, right? Like, how do you be buyer-centric if you don't even know who your buyer is? I am a huge proponent in the power of personas. So that is where I always like to start. Certainly a good place that you can begin is with internal information from things like your sales team. But I'm a big proponent of making sure that you have validated external information like voice of customer research that truly is tapping into the real needs and pain points and lexicon of your buyers. So I definitely recommend buyer personas as a great place to start. I hear from marketers all the time that personas can feel like it's really overwhelming, or it's a really big project, or it's out of budget. But there is really no way to get around the fact that you have to know your buyer to be buyer-centric. But we really have a point of view that there is kind of a good, better, best approach to doing personas. And I'm a big believer that there is a persona approach for every budget. So don't let that be an excuse to not get that information. So don't skip over personas. But also I would say don't stop there. Even within personas, all buyers are unique. So you want to try to make sure to be, thinking about each of them as individuals, and how can you think about creating experiences that are personalized and that they can control for themselves.
Yeah, that's key. A lot of times whenever we're looking at buyer personas, I'm sure that there are some, I've had this happen to me in the past, and I'm sure there are some in the audience who they have a persona and they know somewhat whether that's good, better, or best persona practice is, potentially up for debate. But we have this buyer persona. What next after that? How do we operationalize this?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned, we at the MX Group do a lot of persona projects. And the next question is like, okay, now what? Because personas can be really exciting, and all of a sudden you have this deluge of amazing new information on a bunch of different buyers, and then it can feel a little bit overwhelming. How am I going to get my sales team to use this? How am I going to deal with all of this? And so it can be tempting to kind of put them in a binder and let them gather dust on the shelf, right? Because it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Particularly if it feels like, oh my gosh, now I have this persona stuff and I'm supposed to be buyer-centric. So does that mean I have to change every single thing I'm doing, and I need to make, customized content for every persona times every piece of content that we have times every nurture journey times every event, and all of a sudden it can feel like you need, hundreds or if not, millions of pieces of content. But I don't think it has to feel that way. I think this idea of being fully personalized is something that you can aspire to, but there are kind of steps along the road that you can think about. There's an analogy that I like to think about here, so hang with me for a second. But when I'm thinking about buyer-centric, imagine that your buyer is just hungry for lunch and they kind of walk up to your counter. If all you had to serve was one prepackaged salad, and that's all they had the choice of, and it had 3 things they didn't like and 1 thing they were allergic to, but that was literally all you had to give them, maybe they would still take it, but they'd have to kind of pick through and weed out the thing that they're allergic to and kind of be left with, a little sad offering of what's left. So that's certainly not a very buyer-centric approach. The next thing that you can think about is like, well, what would it look like if you could at least serve up a salad bar for your customer, that they could walk up to your content or your website or your event and find the things that are meaningful to them. There might be some bits of the salad bar that they skip over because that's not into them, and they still have to kind of put it together for themselves. So they have to do a little work, but you're serving it up for them and letting them choose what they value and what they pick. And so that's kind of a better journey along the way towards buyer-centric. But the ideal thing that you'd want to aspire to is imagine that customer walked up to your counter and you could serve them the perfect salad that they wanted. That's that orchestrated that I mentioned before. So you already know what they want and you have a pre-packaged salad that's exactly the ingredients that they would have picked out of your salad bar, but it's already pre-packaged for them and meaningful for them. And then when the customer behind them steps up, you have another pre-packaged salad, but it's completely different and it's really tailored to them. So you can think about that being a level of personalization and customization that you want to aspire to. But if that's not something that you can achieve, take it down a notch and just think about, well, how do I give people the salad bar? How do I let them control what they want? Do I, stop gating my content? Do I make sure that it's clear what people are going to get along the journey? Do I make sure to at least tailor things to the different buyers in the buying group and understand what their different needs are? So I do think there's kind of that spectrum that you can think about, and it's not an all or nothing proposition. But if you're aligning to the customer's needs, beginning with them as the top of mind, you'll get around to what you need in the end. So if you're delivering value to them, you're going to get what you want in the end. And I think that is kind of a mental overlay that you can put over all of the strategies that you might already be doing, whether that's account-based marketing or content marketing or how you think about your website, just kind of putting all of that out and making sure that you have the customer as kind of the top consideration. And you don't have to guess, is the other thing. I talked about personas at the beginning, and that's certainly a way to apply this, but there's also so many tools that are available to marketers these days that you don't have to guess what will be valuable to people. So whether it's running A/B tests on your website or truly run an easy survey out of SurveyMonkey. Ask people, what kind of formats do you want? What kind of information do you want? What would be valuable? You can ask, and people are often very willing to tell you because that will help them do their job.
I really like what you said about the buyer-centric thinking it's really a value, and it's, something that can inform all these other things that we're doing. It doesn't have to be something else that we shift our strategy away from, but it can be something that informs our mindset from a content, marketing, ABM, whatever we're doing. It's really a value that an organization or a person can have. Some of this is all about mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's one of those things that can kind of become this sort of general rule or mindset that you apply to anything that you're doing and just think, what would deliver value to my customer? What is going to create the right experience? And I'll say, even though obviously I sit in the marketing department here at the MX Group and that's my focus, I think the biggest thing about this mindset to take away, besides obviously putting the buyer first, is that it can't only be marketing. You have to kind of get out of your marketing only mindset and understand that your customer doesn't understand when they're being traded off or handed off from marketing to sales to customer success or whatever the case may be. They are just one person that's trying to interact with one company. So I think making sure that you kind of get into this idea where you want to align with your sales team, your product team, your customer success teams, and make sure that you're all rallied around this idea of Let's really care about the buyer. Let's understand what they want. Let's make sure that we're creating a connected and seamless experience for them so that we can really optimize all of our interactions with them along the way, which will ultimately help us deliver a better experience to them, and then make sure that we internally are connected on things like, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to analyze it so that we know how we're doing and we can work as a team to refine it and make sure that we're delivering on that promise of being buyer-centric.
I really love that. And as you're working with your clients at the MX Group, when someone's coming in and considering maybe a shift to going towards this buyer-centric marketing, what's some of the upside? What's some of the inspiration that you give to them in order to help them see the vision that you see and why this is a better way to approach things?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think part of it is just, it can be easy to get kind of caught up in thinking, it's B2B, but we are all really humans. And I think if you think about how we, when we talk to our clients and just think about how they interact, how they experience marketing, how they buy, how they make decisions, it can be a real aha moment that we just want to treat it's kind of a golden rule, right? Like, how can we, treat your buyers and prospects the way that you want to be treated or the way that you want to shop? And when we have done these things for our clients, the results are so impactful. One great example is a lot of the approach that we take to website development is, when we're getting a new website project, maybe the old website that we encounter of a client is very kind of product focused and all of the navigation is organized in a way that's how they talk about themselves internally. And we really take a look at, well, how would your buyer shop for these things? What is the information that they really need to find to make a decision? What's the lexicon that they would use? What are the steps in the order that they need to go through? And sometimes that's a huge shakeup in how the website navigation needs to be structured. But all of a sudden you have people, spending more time on the site. They understand where to go. They understand, the information that's valuable to them as a persona. We're delivering things like interactive calculators and things that help answer their questions and, get to the heart of their problem. And all of a sudden things like conversions and requests for demos and all of those things go through the roof because you're just meeting people where they're at and delivering the experience that they were trying to find. So it's usually a pretty easy sell for clients when they see the potential there.
Love it. Well, Kelly, this has been a great conversation, and I love your perspective on the buyer-centric marketing mindset. So if anybody has any questions or would like to follow up with you, connect with you on this, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing I'll say is we definitely have plenty more to say about this. I would recommend checking out resources at themxgroup.com. Lots of stuff on personas and buyer's journeys and content audits and all that kind of stuff there. Otherwise, I love to connect with marketers on LinkedIn, hear about your challenges, hear what's working for you. Happy to answer any questions. So I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. It's Kellie de Leon, KELLIE. DELEON.
Perfect, Kelly. Well, thanks again for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, for having me. It was great to talk with you and exciting to just be thinking about how to make marketing more valuable.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Kelly.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three. A no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.